The morning of 1941 rose cold and indifferent, as if the sky itself wished to avoid witnessing what was about to unfold. The air carried a stillness heavy enough to press against the lungs, a reminder of how fragile a human life becomes when war decides its fate. Frost clung to the ground, crunching softly beneath the boots of soldiers marching with mechanical precision. The condemned man stood isolated, a lone silhouette against a horizon carved by conflict and iron. Even nature seemed to recoil, bracing for the echo of gunfire that was moments away. The firing squad assembled with rigid discipline, each soldier understanding his place in the machinery of wartime justice. Rifles were checked in practiced silence, hands trembling not from cold, but from the knowledge of what they were ordered to do. War stories often speak of battles and heroism, but rarely of these quiet moments where life is deliberately taken. The condemned man exhaled slowly, as if releasing the last warmth of his humanity into the frigid air. His breath rose gently, the only sign that he remained living. Nearby, an officer unfolded the final document, a simple sheet carrying the weight of death, stamped and filed like any other wartime order. Classified documents seldom reveal the human cost behind them. They only record outcomes, never the agony that precedes them. The man's name, or what was left of it, had already been absorbed into the archives of World War II, marked for removal from the world of the living. Even before the bullets flew, he had been erased on paper. The man lifted his eyes, not in hope, but in acceptance, the kind that only emerges when a person realizes fate has already chosen its path. In the distance, ruins from previous battles stood like broken monuments to forgotten heroes. The atmosphere carried the scent of smoke, mud, and resignation, a cocktail familiar to any soldier of 1941. This was not merely an execution. It was the closing chapter of a life overshadowed by war and silence. And yet something in the air whispered that the story was not ready to end. As the squad prepared, an uncanny stillness wrapped itself around the scene, creating a cinematic tension one might find only in the darkest corners of wartime history. The officer's voice cut through the cold, commanding the soldiers into position with a tone that offered no room for doubt. Boots shifted on icy ground, rifles lifted, and the world seemed to pause on the brink of violence. Hidden history often begins exactly in moments like this. Moments meant to be final. Moments meant to leave no survivors. The condemned man straightened his posture, a final act of dignity amid a world crumbling under the weight of World War II. His eyes did not plead. They simply reflected the reality of countless civilians and soldiers lost in the chaos of Nazi occupation. Even the wind seemed to sigh in anticipation, carrying with it a sense of inevitability. This was supposed to be the end of his war story, the final line in a file destined for archival dust. Every sign pointed toward death. But history is unpredictable, and wartime secrets often defy logic. What no one present that morning understood, not the officer, not the firing squad, not even the condemned man himself, was that destiny had quietly altered its course. Underneath the frost, beneath the cracked earth, within the very breath of the man about to be killed, something remained unfinished. What no one knew is that history had already decided he would not die that day. He was not a hero carved into stone, nor a name preserved in military halls. He was an ordinary man swept into extraordinary circumstances. Born into a world that seemed determined to break him, he carried the physical and emotional scars of a life hardened long before war began. His hands bore calluses from labor, his posture shaped by years of struggle, and his silence spoke louder than any recorded testimony. What kind of man stands before a firing squad with such acceptance? What hidden history shaped the breath he released into the cold? His arrest had been swift, the kind of wartime judgment reserved for those caught at the wrong place at the wrong time. Some said he was a resistance sympathizer, others whispered he had been mistaken for someone else, a common tragedy in the fog of World War II. Accusations traveled faster than truth during Nazi occupation, and files were often stamped before facts were known. Was he guilty of betrayal, or simply guilty of fate choosing him as its next victim? In war, the difference rarely matters. By 1941, he had endured loss upon loss, family, home, dignity, stripped away by the relentless cycle of conflict consuming Europe. His shoulders carried not just the weight of the charges against him, but the weight of a world tearing itself apart. To the authorities, he was just another entry in a growing list of wartime secrets destined for a classified archive. Yet beneath the mud and exhaustion lived a man who had survived much more than the world had ever asked of him. Did anyone among his captors sense the depth of the life before them? Before the execution, he had been interrogated repeatedly, his voice fading with each accusation hurled in his direction. Documents were written, rewritten, and altered, none reflecting the truth he struggled to defend. Wartime bureaucracy cared little for individual stories. It devoured them, leaving behind numbers, dates, and ink stains. His file told one version of events, but his eyes carried another, one shaped by desperation and resilience. How many more stories were buried beneath the weight of such silence? As he stood awaiting death, fragments of his past flickered through his mind like scenes from a documentary left unfinished. A mother's warning, a friend's betrayal, the echo of distant laughter from a life long lost. These were not the thoughts of a villain, but of a man longing for one more breath of meaning. Could his journey have unfolded differently, if not for the chaos unleashed by World War II? Could anyone truly claim to understand him in those final moments? Soldiers escorting him saw a prisoner, not a man with a past worth remembering. They looked at him through the lens of orders, not empathy. Yet somewhere beneath the grime and the beard, behind the bruises and exhaustion, remained the flicker of a forgotten hero. Not a hero of battlefield glory, but of survival, endurance, and silent courage. How often had war punished the innocent while letting the guilty walk free? His life's final chapter seemed predetermined, yet destiny rarely follows the path expected of it. The condemned man had already survived more than most could bear, and though his file declared him finished, the story within him refused to fade. A man the world had forgotten, yet fate had not finished with him. 1941 was a turning point in World War II, a year soaked in fear, uncertainty, and relentless violence. Across Europe, borders shifted like sand under the weight of advancing armies and collapsing nations. The Nazi occupation tightened its grip, leaving civilians trapped in an increasingly suffocating landscape. Executions were not anomalies, they were routine instruments of control. The condemned man's fate was not unique. Thousands met similar ends in fields, forests, and courtyards swallowed by war. As winter deepened, hunger carved itself into the faces of soldiers and civilians alike. Supply lines broke, loyalties fractured, and survival replaced morality as the driving force of daily life. War stories from 1941 reveal a world drowning in loss, where even the simplest act, a glance, a word, a misplaced document, could decide life or death. For those labeled traitors, justice moved swiftly, without mercy or second thought. His execution was merely a line item in the machinery of occupation. The chaos of front lines spilling across the continent created an atmosphere of perpetual uncertainty. Resistance fighters emerged in shadows, risking everything to defy their oppressors. Villages vanished overnight, consumed by conflict or scorched in retaliation. Intelligence files thickened with reports of suspected activity, many wrong, many fatal. Was the man one of these mistaken identities caught in the storm of shifting allegiances? The wartime environment blurred the line between guilt and innocence beyond recognition. In 1941, hope was a rare commodity. Even soldiers carrying out orders felt the crushing weight of their actions. Uniforms offered no protection from the moral wounds inflicted by war's demands. The firing squad that would take aim at the condemned man were not executioners by nature. They were victims of circumstance. Each had lost something: family, homeland, or dignity. The war did not create monsters. It twisted ordinary men into instruments of survival. Historical records from the period show how widespread executions became tools of intimidation rather than justice. Entire populations lived under the constant threat of violence, their lives reduced to footnotes in classified documents. Within such darkness, one man's unlikely survival stands out not just as a miracle, but as a question. How did someone escape death in a year when death ruled everything? Amid this atmosphere of despair, rumors spread faster than truth. Secret missions, failed resistance efforts, and mistaken arrests filled the hidden history of 1941. The condemned man's story was one thread in a vast tapestry of wartime secrets that reshaped the continent. His execution should have been one of countless forgotten entries in a wartime archive, sealed and ignored, yet something bound his fate to a different outcome. Because in a world submerged in brutality, even the smallest spark of life becomes a rebellion. In a world drowning in violence, one improbable survival would defy all logic. His death sentence began not with a gunshot, but with ink pressed into paper. The quietest yet most damning sound of wartime justice. The document that sealed his fate was written quickly, stamped with authority, and filed with chilling efficiency. To the officers reviewing intelligence files, he was merely another name to eliminate, another risk neutralized in the chaos of World War II. There was no appeal, no plea, no opportunity for truth to reshape the verdict. His life had been reduced to a line item. The trial, if it could be called one, was swift and merciless. Questions were asked not to uncover facts, but to confirm suspicions already decided. Documents were stacked against him, many based on incomplete reports, rumors, or coerced statements. In wartime, bureaucracy becomes a weapon sharper than any blade, capable of killing with a signature instead of a bullet. The man stood before his accusers powerless, watching his fate take shape in the cold strokes of a clerk's pen. Soldiers delivered the sentence with stoic faces, avoiding his eyes as if acknowledging his humanity might weaken their resolve. They read the order aloud, each word heavy with finality. It did not matter whether he had betrayed anyone or simply been caught in the wrong place. Wartime systems prioritize control over justice, obedience over truth. The condemned man understood this. He had seen too many innocents disappear between the cracks of occupation. Now he would join them. By the time he was escorted to the holding area, his fate felt irreversible. The file marked him as a threat, and under Nazi occupation, such labels were rarely questioned. Classified documents of this nature were never intended to be reconsidered. They were stamped, archived, and forgotten. The man became a ghost before he was even shot. Resistance fighters, civilians, and suspected spies all met similar fates, erased not by bullets, but by bureaucratic certainty. Yet as he waited for dawn, something inside him refused to collapse. He had faced hardship before, starvation, betrayal, loss, and somehow survived each one. Still, the sentence weighed heavily on him, pressing against his chest like an invisible hand. The file declaring him guilty felt like a personal condemnation from history itself. How many others had been silenced by ink long before bullets ended their breath? When the guards returned for him, the sentence might as well have already been carried out. His name was now aligned with death, written into the war stories of 1941 as another casualty of occupation. He walked forward not because he accepted the verdict, but because he had no choice. The machinery of war left no room for hesitation or hope. On paper, his life had already ended. But paper can lie, and ink, no matter how official, cannot predict fate. On paper, he was already dead. The path to the execution site was short, but for the condemned man it felt like an endless corridor carved through time. Each footstep echoed softly in the morning frost, a rhythm marking the final beats of a life shaped by hardship and war. The guards flanking him walked with rigid discipline, their faces hardened by duty rather than cruelty. To them, this was another task in an endless series of grim responsibilities assigned by the machinery of World War II. The man's thoughts drifted as he walked, not toward hope or fear, but toward fragments of memory long buried beneath exhaustion. He remembered the warmth of sunlight on a distant afternoon, the echo of laughter in a world before Nazi occupation, the feel of earth beneath his hands during simpler labor. These moments came to him like flickering images from a film reel, incomplete, but vivid enough to remind him of what life had once been. Was he marching toward death or toward the final acknowledgement of all he had endured? As the group progressed, the officer leading the escort maintained a steady pace, his boots leaving crisp impressions in the frost. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke lingering from distant battles. War stories etched themselves into the landscape, transforming peaceful surroundings into silent witnesses of brutality. The man felt the weight of the earth beneath him, grounding him in a reality he could not escape. Nearby structures, once homes or barns, now lay shattered by artillery fire, monuments to lives interrupted. The condemned man glanced at them with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. He too had been broken, reshaped, and ultimately consumed by the violence of 1941. Yet beneath the weariness, something in him resisted complete surrender. Could a final walk be anything other than resignation, or was there still room for defiance in the quiet spaces between breaths? One of the soldiers escorting him avoided eye contact, his jaw tight with conflicted emotion. Executions were part of wartime protocol, but the human spirit does not always accept such duties with ease. The condemned man sensed the tension around him, a silent acknowledgement that this end was undeserved, or at least deeply tragic. The war had forced men into roles they never sought, shaping them into instruments of decisions made far above their ranks. As they approached the clearing, the world seemed to narrow into a tunnel of cold light and muted sounds. The man inhaled deeply, feeling the burn of winter air in his chest. He wondered if anyone would remember him, or whether he would fade into the classified archives of wartime secrets, another forgotten casualty. Did any trace of his life remain meaningful within the vast shadow of World War II? His walk ended at the designated mark, a patch of earth worn smooth by the weight of countless footsteps taken before him. He lifted his chin, not in pride, but in acknowledgement of the life he had lived, however brief or tumultuous. The finality of the moment pressed down on him, yet something in the air felt unfinished, unresolved. Each step carried the weight of a life about to end. The firing squad stood in formation, their breath visible in the bitter air, their rifles gripped with a tension that betrayed their training. These were not hardened executioners, but ordinary soldiers consumed by the machinery of World War II, suddenly placed in a role no man desires. Their eyes shifted between discipline and discomfort, each one silently asking a question he dared not speak. How many of them wondered if they stood on the wrong side of history? They had gathered not out of malice, but obedience, the kind demanded by wartime protocols that leave no room for moral hesitation. Each soldier carried his own grief, his own loss, buried beneath layers of uniform and expectation. Did they think of family, of fallen comrades, or did they force their minds blank, fearing that empathy might unravel their duty? In a war shaped by chaos and cruelty, how much choice does a man truly have? The officer in charge surveyed the scene with stern focus, his expression carved by years of conflict rather than personal conviction. He recited the procedure with mechanical certainty, as if clinging to structure could shield him from the weight of what was about to occur. The condemned man's file sat tucked beneath his arm, a classified document that spoke louder than any plea of innocence. Did he ever question the accuracy of the reports that condemned the man before him? Rifles were raised in unison, the metallic click of bolts sliding into place, disrupting the heavy silence. The soldiers exhaled slowly, steadying their aim as frost clung to their gloves. Their orders were clear: end a life and move on. Yet behind their discipline lingered unspoken conflict. Could any of them feel the gravity of extinguishing a human life outside the chaos of battle? Or had war blurred every moral boundary beyond recognition? One soldier's hands trembled slightly, a reminder that even the most trained cannot entirely silence the human heart. He glanced briefly at the condemned man, searching for something, a sign of forgiveness, a spark of anger, perhaps even resignation. But the man stood motionless, his eyes carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. What stories of hardship did his silence conceal? As the squad prepared for the command, time seemed to stretch impossibly long, each second filled with tension so thick it felt almost tangible. The cold tightened around them, amplifying every breath, every heartbeat, every unspoken doubt. They awaited the order that would turn men into executioners, hoping the moment would pass quickly, hoping their hands would not remember the recoil. Could any of them have imagined how this execution would alter history? The officer inhaled, lifted his arm, and prepared to speak the word that would seal a life. None of them realized that their actions were about to create one of the most unbelievable wartime secrets ever recorded. 5 rifles raised, 5 lives about to collide with fate. The command shattered the silence like a violent crack across the frozen air. Fire! The rifles erupted in unison, their reports echoing through the clearing with deadly certainty. Smoke burst from the barrels, drifting upward in slow, haunting plumes. The condemned man's body jerked as the bullet struck, his weight folding beneath him as he fell to the earth. The ground accepted him with a dull thud, absorbing the finality of what appeared to be death. For an instant, the world froze. Even the wind seemed to halt, unwilling to disturb the stillness that followed the shots. The soldiers lowered their rifles with practiced detachment, though their eyes revealed the lingering shock of what they had just done. They watched for the faintest sign of movement, a twitch, a flinch, but saw nothing. Death, as far as they could tell, had done its work swiftly and decisively. The execution seemed clean, efficient, and absolute. The officer stepped forward, his boots sinking slightly into the cold earth as he assessed the body. Wartime procedures required no sentiment, only confirmation. He studied the man's stillness, the blood darkening the ground beneath him, the lack of breath fogging the air. Everything aligned with the expected outcome. Another execution completed, another entry for the archives of 1941. The officer nodded once, signaling the end of the act. The file in his hand might as well have been sealed with the man's final breath. As the firing squad stood at attention, their minds drifted between relief and unease. Some avoided looking at the fallen man. Others stared, as if trying to understand the fragility of existence in a war that consumed lives without hesitation. The execution had followed every rule, every protocol. There was no reason to suspect anything other than death. But beneath the surface of certainty lay the first hints of an extraordinary truth. Blood spread slowly through the frost, forming delicate patterns that glistened beneath the morning light. The man's body, though still, seemed almost suspended between worlds, not quite gone, not fully present. The cold air whispered around him, carrying with it an eerie sense of unfinished business. Was this truly the end, or merely the illusion of it? In the chaos of war, even death can be deceived. As the soldiers turned away, the condemned man's chest remained motionless, his face pale, his limbs slack. Yet something in the atmosphere resisted closure, a subtle tension suggesting that fate had hesitated. The bullets had found their mark, yes, but the story they carved had not yet reached its conclusion. The execution appeared flawless, but hidden history often blooms in the cracks of certainty. The squad marched away, their boots fading into the distance, unaware that they were leaving behind a miracle dressed as a corpse. What happened next would challenge the boundaries of belief and redefine the meaning of survival in wartime. To the soldiers, the man was dead. Silence settled over the clearing like a shroud, wrapping itself around the lifeless figure left behind. The echo of gunfire faded into the vast emptiness of the forest, swallowed by the cold air and distant rumblings of war. Without the presence of the soldiers, the world seemed eerily still, as if time had paused to acknowledge the gravity of what had occurred. The condemned man lay motionless, his body cooling rapidly under the watchful sky. This was the silence of finality, or so it appeared. The firing squad marched away in tight formation, their eyes fixed forward, their breaths synchronized with the rhythm of duty. None dared glance back. Executions were not moments to revisit. Their footsteps faded, leaving only faint impressions in the frost, soon to be erased by wind and memory alike. They believed their role in this story had ended. In the archives of World War II, this entry would be one of countless wartime secrets forgotten by all but the record keepers. As the last soldier disappeared into the tree line, the clearing transformed from an execution site into a lonely stretch of wilderness, haunted by what it had witnessed. Nature resumed its muted whispers. The soft rustle of branches, the distant cry of a crow circling above. The air held a strange weight, as though the world were holding its breath, waiting. Death seemed absolute, yet something beneath the surface felt unsettled, unfinished. Could silence ever reveal the truth hidden beneath its stillness? The man's body remained perfectly still, limbs sprawled where they had fallen. Blood seeped into the frozen ground, forming a dark halo beneath him. His helmet lay slightly askew, revealing the worn lines of a face shaped by hardship and exhaustion. If one were to stumble upon the scene, they would see only a casualty of war, another life extinguished by the merciless demands of 1941. But silence can be deceptive, a veil that hides more than it reveals. For those who study war stories and forgotten heroes, moments like this hold powerful significance. History is often written in loud events, battles, commands, victories, yet the most extraordinary truths sometimes unfold in quiet moments. The executioners believed their duty was complete, but history had already begun rewriting itself in whispers. Was this silence an ending, or the beginning of something no one anticipated? The cold wrapped itself tighter around the man's still form, freezing droplets of blood against fabric and skin. Every breath of wind stirred the remnants of smoke, swirling them like ghostly threads above him. The scene resembled countless photographs from the era, stark, tragic, final. Yet beneath the authenticity of death lingered the faintest suggestion of life refusing to yield. Had nature paused not in mourning but in anticipation? This moment, the fragile divide between death and the impossible, set the stage for one of the most astonishing wartime survival stories ever recorded. But the battlefield holds secrets, even in silence. The cold pressed relentlessly against his body, slowing the spread of blood, tightening the skin, and masking the faintest signs of life. Minutes passed, long, heavy, unforgiving minutes, before the first tremor of survival revealed itself. It was barely perceptible, a slight twitch in his fingers hidden beneath the crust of frost. In any other moment, it would have meant nothing. But here, in the aftermath of execution, it meant everything. The impossible had begun. His chest rose shallowly, almost imperceptible, as if the air itself resisted entering his lungs. The bullets had found him, yet somehow missed the final mark. One had struck a metal object in his pocket, a token, a medal, a simple artifact of his life, absorbing enough force to prevent fatal damage. Another bullet passed cleanly through soft tissue, sparing vital organs. A third had misfired entirely, defying the certainty of the firing squad's aim. How does a man survive what was designed to kill him? For a moment, he hovered between life and death, suspended in a fragile twilight where consciousness flickered like a distant flame. Pain surged through him in waves, each one grounding him deeper into reality. The world around him blurred, soundless and distant, as if he were observing his own body from afar. And yet, beneath it all, His heart refused to stop. Was it sheer resilience, fate, or the stubborn human instinct to defy the inevitable? The cold that had threatened to extinguish him now served as a shield, slowing his bleeding, preserving what life remained. His breath fogged faintly against the air, a ghostly signature of his refusal to die. For the first time since the shots were fired, a spark of awareness flickered in his mind. A thought not of escape or triumph, but of survival. The realization that he was still alive struck him with both terror and relief. How many others had lain still after execution, never given the chance to rise again? His fingers curled slightly, grasping at the frozen earth beneath him, anchoring him to the world he had not yet left. Muscles twitched, nerves awakened, and his body began responding to impulses wrapped in agony. Every movement felt like a battle against the weight of death itself, but he persisted. He had no plan, no hope, no strength to flee, only the instinct to rise, to breathe, to remain. In that moment, survival became an act of rebellion. As consciousness returned in fragments, he understood that he must stay silent, hidden from those who believed they had ended him. The executioners were still close enough to hear a cry, far enough to be unaware of life stirring behind them. Every shallow breath risked discovery, yet each was necessary to keep death at bay. In the frozen dawn of 1941, he clung to existence with the slenderest thread of will. Death had missed its mark. When historians later reviewed the classified documents surrounding the execution, inconsistencies emerged like cracks in an old photograph. How could a firing squad fail to kill a man at such close range? What combination of factors, chance, physics, or fate, intervened that morning? These questions echo through wartime archives, challenging our understanding of what occurred. Could anyone have predicted that survival was even possible? The first anomaly was the misfire. One of the rifles failed to discharge, a rare malfunction in military-issued weapons maintained with strict discipline. Soldiers later reported hearing only 4 shots instead of 5, though the chaos of the moment blurred their certainty. Was it divine intervention, mechanical failure, or simple coincidence? In war stories, even small errors can reshape destinies. How many lives have turned on the pull of a trigger that failed? The second bullet struck a metal object in the man's pocket, a medal perhaps, or a personal keepsake. Such items often carried sentimental value, forgotten until moments like these reveal their unexpected significance. The object absorbed much of the bullet's impact, flattening it and preventing a lethal wound. Had he carried anything else or nothing at all, his story would have ended instantly. Can something as small as a piece of metal defy the machinery of war? A third bullet passed cleanly through his body, missing arteries and vital organs by fractions of an inch. Medical experts reviewing similar cases from World War II describe such survival as miraculous, though not impossible. The angle, distance, and positioning of the man all played roles in preserving his life. In the chaos of execution, precision becomes fragile. Could the soldiers have misjudged their aim under the weight of cold and fear? The final factor was the cold itself. The frigid air slowed his bleeding and preserved muscle function long enough for consciousness to return. Hypothermia, usually an enemy of life, briefly acted as an accidental ally. In other circumstances, warmth might have accelerated blood loss beyond recovery. Who could imagine that the brutal winter of 1941 would become part of a survival story? Together, these coincidences formed an improbable chain, each link essential, each one capable of breaking the pattern. Had any detail been different, the man would have died. Instead, these anomalies converged into a hidden history that defies easy explanation. The execution had followed procedure, and yet fate altered the outcome. The science of his survival defied military mathematics. When the first spark of awareness returned, it brought excruciating pain as its companion. The man lay trembling, his body reacting to the shock of trauma and cold. Instinct urged him to move, to flee, to cling to whatever shred of life remained. Without strength, He pushed against the frozen ground, fingers digging into the earth as he began the slow, agonizing crawl away from the execution site. Blood marked his path in uneven streaks, recording each inch of survival. Every motion sent a wave of pain through his chest and limbs, threatening to drag him back into unconsciousness. But the will to live, raw, primal, unyielding, drove him forward. The world around him blurred, trees swayed like shadows in an old film, and the sky dimmed behind a haze of dizziness. His breaths came shallow and ragged, yet they persisted. How many men in World War II found themselves clawing at the edge of death, refusing to be erased by violence? The earth beneath him was cold and unforgiving, seeping through his clothes and chilling his wounds. His hands stiffened, his fingers numb, yet he forced them to grip the soil again and again. Each pull felt like a battle of its own, a war within the war. His struggle embodied the resilience found in countless wartime stories where survival emerged not from strength, but from sheer determination against impossible odds. Could anyone witnessing this fight deny the power of human will? The clearing receded behind him, becoming a distant memory swallowed by frost and silence. He dragged himself toward the shelter of the woods, the shadows promising concealment and a chance at life. Branches scraped his arms, roots pulled at his clothing, and the forest floor felt like a labyrinth designed to test his endurance. Yet he pressed on, guided by nothing more than instinct and desperation. How far can a wounded man travel when every movement risks collapse? His vision faded in and out, at times losing all clarity. The world flickered like damaged footage, each frame capturing struggle, fear, and pain. He remembered faces, family, friends, moments of joy, flashing through his mind as though reminding him of what he fought to preserve. Every memory fueled the next movement, each one a reminder that death had not claimed him yet. Was survival simply a matter of refusing to surrender? Even as darkness crept across his senses, he sensed the forest accepting him, its shadows wrapping around him like protective arms. He collapsed more than once, only to rise again with trembling determination. The sound of distant boots haunted him, urging him deeper into safety. His crawl became a symbol of defiance, a living testament that even an execution cannot silence a man who refuses to die. By the time he reached the edge of the forest, his strength was nearly gone. He collapsed beneath a cluster of trees, gasping as pain pulsed through every part of his body. Yet he had escaped the clearing of death, moving farther than anyone might believe possible. No man should have survived, yet one did. He awoke in fragments, consciousness flickering like a lantern in a storm. The forest canopy shifted above him, blurred by fever and blood loss, transforming branches into ghostly silhouettes. Every breath tasted of iron and earth. His wounds throbbed relentlessly, each heartbeat expanding the fog of confusion surrounding him. Hunger gnawed at him, cold pierced him, and pain anchored him to reality. For 3 days, he drifted between life and oblivion. A man trapped in the shadows of war. Nights were the worst. The temperature plummeted, and the darkness stretched endlessly, swallowing his sense of time. Wind howled through the trees, chilling him to the bone, threatening to extinguish the fragile ember of his survival. He curled into himself for warmth, trembling uncontrollably. Memories surfaced, a warm fire from childhood, a mother's voice, the comfort of a familiar home long gone. These fleeting images kept him tethered to the world. Was the mind trying to guide him back to life, or softly preparing him for death? Hallucinations blurred the boundary between reality and imagination. He saw faces, some kind, some accusing. Voices murmured warnings or promises, echoing from the deep chambers of memory. He questioned whether he truly lay alone in the woods, or if unseen spirits watched over him. In the chaos of World War II, countless soldiers experienced such visions when pushed to their limits. Could his mind withstand the torment long enough for rescue? During the day, he attempted to crawl again, dragging his weakened body forward inch by inch. The forest roots tugged at him, branches obscured his path, exhaustion pulled him downward. Yet every movement brought him marginally closer to survival. His wounds reopened, staining the ground with fresh blood. Birds circled overhead as if observing a man on the threshold of existence. What gave him the strength to continue when everything around him spoke of surrender? His sense of direction vanished entirely. The woods became a maze, twisting and turning without mercy. Hunger sharpened into delirium. Thirst burned through him. He collected dew from leaves, pressed melting frost against his lips, clinging to any moisture he could find. Instinct guided him more than reason. The forest floor became both enemy and cleanser, scraping his wounds while cushioning his fall. Could nature itself be the silent ally that kept him alive? On the third day, exhaustion reached its peak. He collapsed near a fallen log, unable to move another inch. His breath came in shallow gasps, his vision dimming into darkness. The forest around him blurred into a grayscale painting of despair and resilience. His fingers dug weakly into the soil as if refusing to let go of the world. All he could do was wait, for death, for rescue, for fate to decide which path his story would follow. And then, just as his strength faded entirely, muffled voices approached, distant, unfamiliar, yet unmistakably human. He tried to lift his head, but his body no longer obeyed. Footsteps drew nearer, crunching through leaves and frost. A final thought flickered through his fading mind. Someone is here? It was the last spark before darkness claimed him again. But something kept him alive long enough to be found. 3 villagers wandered into the woods that morning, searching for firewood and small game to sustain them through another harsh wartime week. The forest had become both refuge and danger under Nazi occupation, but necessity drove them deeper each day. As they walked, one of them noticed an unusual shape sprawled near a fallen tree. A shape too large to be an animal, too still to be anything but human. Fear rippled through them. Had they stumbled upon a corpse? Or something worse? Cautiously, they approached, their breath quickening as the figure came into focus. He was covered in dirt, blood, and frost, a man ravaged by violence and exhaustion. His uniform was torn, his face bruised, his helmet dented. At first glance, he appeared dead, another casualty of World War II, abandoned in the woods. But one villager knelt and placed a trembling hand near the man's mouth. A faint, fragile breath escaped. The impossible was true. He was alive. Shock rippled through them. No one survived an execution, especially not one carried out by a firing squad. They exchanged anxious glances, fully aware of the danger. Helping an enemy of the regime could bring severe punishment. And yet, something in his condition, the sheer will that kept him breathing, stirred compassion within them. They could not leave him to die. Hidden history is often shaped not by soldiers, but by ordinary people who choose humanity over fear. They lifted him carefully, struggling under his weight as they carried him toward their village. His head lolled from side to side, eyes opening briefly before drifting shut again. He murmured incoherent words, fragments of a story trapped between consciousness and delirium. The villagers spoke softly to him, reassuring him despite no certainty he understood. What drove them forward, courage, pity, or the instinct to save a life no matter the cost? Upon reaching their village, they concealed him in a barn where the straw provided warmth and camouflage. One woman brought water and cloths, cleaning his wounds as best she could. Another fetched herbs and broth prepared for the sick. They worked silently, each aware they were risking far more than their own safety. In times of war, compassion becomes an act of rebellion. Were they helping a traitor, a resistance fighter, or an innocent man caught in the crossfire of bureaucratic brutality? Over the next hours, his condition shifted between improvement and decline. Fever racked his body. Shivers overtook him. At moments, his breathing nearly stopped. Yet he clung to life, refusing to surrender to death's persistent pull. The villagers watched over him through the night, taking turns to ensure he did not slip quietly into silence. Every breath he drew felt like a small victory against the overwhelming darkness of wartime suffering. When he finally opened his eyes fully, confusion clouded his gaze. He whispered questions the villagers could not understand, questions about the execution, the forest, the fate he narrowly escaped. Their astonishment deepened. Not only had he lived, but he remained strong enough to begin speaking. They exchanged looks of disbelief and awe, realizing they had saved a man whose death had already been written into official records. They saved a ghost, a man who should not exist. News of the miraculous survival spread quietly, carried by whispers rather than written reports. But in wartime, whispers travel fast. Within days, word reached local authorities that a man executed by firing squad had somehow remained alive. At first, the commander responsible dismissed the rumor as nonsense, another wartime myth born from fear and imagination. Executions were final, procedures were strict. No one survived. Yet the report persisted, nagging at the edges of his certainty. He summoned the officer who had overseen the execution and demanded clarification. With rigid posture and uneasy eyes, the officer recounted the event. The rifles fired, the man fell, the absence of movement, the confirmation of death. Nothing had appeared unusual. No hesitation, no signs of error. The commander listened, increasingly agitated. If the account was accurate, how could the prisoner have escaped the finality of bullets? Was someone lying, or had fate intervened? The commander ordered a review of the classified documents associated with the case. Files were retrieved, cross-checked, examined with growing frustration. Everything aligned perfectly. The charges, the sentence, the execution order, the confirmation. There were no inconsistencies, no missing pages, no overlooked details. The record painted a picture of absolute certainty. Yet the whisper of impossibility lingered, challenging every assumption. Could a bureaucratic system so precise truly be defied by a single man? Attempts to verify the rumor only increased the mystery. The body had disappeared, leaving no trace of blood except at the initial site. No other corpses were found in the nearby woods. Patrols sent to investigate returned empty-handed. The execution squad insisted they had followed procedure without deviation. The commander's frustration grew. How does one rationalize an event that defies both logic and documentation? What explanation satisfies a man whose authority rests on order and control? As pressure mounted, the commander reviewed the man's original file once more. Something about it unsettled him. Not its contents, but its implications. If the prisoner had survived, what did that mean for the trust placed in military operations? What would superiors say if they learned an executed man was still breathing? The commander scribbled notes in the margin, trying to reconcile the impossible with the undeniable. Yet no answer emerged, only questions that deepened the mystery. Rumors spread among soldiers and villagers, each retelling more dramatic than the last. Some claimed the man had been protected by divine intervention. Others whispered of resistance fighters rescuing him in the night. The truth, lost in layers of fear and speculation, became a story in itself, one too dangerous to acknowledge openly. The commander faced a decision: pursue the matter further or bury it beneath the weight of wartime chaos. Could he afford to let such an anomaly challenge military discipline? His final reaction, written hastily in the margin of the report, encapsulated the entire ordeal. Not a sentence, not an explanation, not a theory. Just a single word loaded with disbelief, frustration, and awe. One word appeared on the commander's note: impossible. In the following weeks, the story of the man who survived his own execution spread like wildfire, carried by whispers through trenches, villages, and occupied towns. Soldiers spoke of it around campfires, unable to reconcile the impossibility of what had happened. How could anyone survive a firing squad in the middle of World War II? What force, luck, fate, or something else, had intervened in that cold morning of 1941? Could this survival challenge everything they believed about life and death? For many, the tale became a symbol of resilience amid despair. In a world where death loomed over every decision, the man's survival offered a flicker of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest chapters of hidden history, miracles could emerge. Others viewed the story with unease, questioning whether such an event hinted at weaknesses within the occupying forces. Could news of this anomaly inspire resistance fighters, encouraging them to believe the enemy's control was not absolute? Civilian populations, living under constant fear of Nazi occupation, found themselves captivated by the story. Mothers whispered it to children as proof that fate sometimes defied cruelty. Elders repeated it as a reminder that the human spirit could endure even when crushed by injustice. But lingering questions remained. What does it mean when a dead man walks again? Does it blur the boundaries between fate and survival? Among soldiers, the psychological impact was profound. Executions were supposed to be final, unquestionable acts, yet this event revealed cracks in the facade of wartime certainty. Some began to doubt their ability to control life and death. Others wondered if destiny had intervened for reasons beyond comprehension. Could such doubts weaken resolve on the battlefield or challenge loyalty to military authority? Historians would later analyze the event, exploring how it influenced morale, resistance movements, and wartime storytelling. Survival against impossible odds often becomes mythologized, reshaped into narratives that transcend fact while revealing deeper truths. The man's case became part of the war's secret missions and archival anomalies. A file whispered among officers, a cautionary tale of uncertainty. Did this survival reflect a greater truth about the chaos of war? For the man himself, the impact was far more personal. He carried not only the trauma of execution, but the burden of being a living contradiction. To be alive when the world believed him dead meant he existed between identities, a forgotten civilian, a ghost, a symbol of defiance. How does one rebuild a life when even fate refuses to follow its expected course? His survival resonated through time, raising questions about destiny, resilience, and the unpredictable nature of war. What does war mean when even death fails? When researchers later attempted to trace the man's identity, they encountered an unsettling truth. His name had all but vanished from official records. Documents that should have contained details about his trial and execution were missing, altered, or archived under ambiguous classifications. It was as though history itself conspired to bury his existence. Why would authorities erase the story of a man who defied death? What secrets lay hidden within the silence of forgotten files? Some speculated that embarrassment drove the cover-up. A firing squad failing in its duty threatened the appearance of order during Nazi occupation. Such an anomaly challenged both morale and authority. Could officials have deliberately removed evidence to protect their reputation? War stories often reveal that truth is inconvenient to those in power, especially when it undermines their control. Others believed his survival placed him at risk. If the wrong people discovered he lived, they might hunt him down to correct the mistake. Villagers who helped him knew the dangers. Their silence became part of the hidden history surrounding his escape. Would revealing his identity have placed too many lives in jeopardy? Could secrecy have been the only protection available? Still, others theorized that he joined the ranks of resistance fighters after recovering, adopting a new name, and disappearing into the shadows. Many survivors of wartime injustice sought purpose in fighting back, turning their suffering into fuel for rebellion. If he became one of them, his former identity would have needed to vanish. Did he transform from condemned prisoner into forgotten hero? The absence of documents created a vacuum into which legends grew. Rumors spread of soldiers encountering a man who resembled the executed prisoner, fighting quietly in sabotage operations. Others claimed he fled the region entirely, seeking refuge far from the reach of military authorities. Without evidence, these stories remain speculation. Fragments of a narrative scattered across time. What truth lies behind these whispers? Modern historians attempting to uncover the truth face an impossible challenge. The trail ends abruptly, swallowed by missing pages and censored lines. His name appears briefly in an execution log, then disappears entirely. No burial record, no transfer, no further notes. It is as though the execution erased only the bureaucratic version of him, while the man himself continued living in the margins of history. Could this absence be intentional, a deliberate removal from official memory? Ultimately, the mystery persists precisely because of what is missing. War has a way of erasing those it fails to understand. The man who survived his execution belongs to that quiet category of wartime secrets. Too improbable to document, too powerful to forget, a survival too inconvenient to be remembered. As we revisit the extraordinary journey of the man who survived his own execution, we uncover more than a wartime anomaly. We uncover a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. In a world consumed by violence, where bullets and bureaucracy determined the fate of millions, one man's refusal to die defied every expectation. His story reminds us that even in the darkest chapters of World War II, threads of hope and defiance wove themselves quietly into the fabric of hidden history. His survival forces us to confront the fragile boundary between life and death. How many others clung to existence with similar strength, unnoticed by the world? How many stories remain buried beneath archival dust, waiting to emerge and reshape our understanding of wartime secrets? His journey is not just about escaping death. It is about challenging the narrative that war controls everything. Sometimes even death hesitates. The man's transformation, from condemned prisoner to living paradox, reveals the unpredictable nature of fate. His willpower, coupled with improbable circumstances, created a crack in the machinery of destruction. These moments remind us that survival is not always logical, nor is it always fair. Yet they offer a rare glimpse into the courage embedded in ordinary individuals whose names never appear in history books. We honor him not for heroism defined by battlefield glory, but for the quiet defiance that kept his heart beating when the world believed it had stopped. His survival represents a victory not over soldiers or armies, but over despair itself. It is a story that stretches beyond its moment, resonating across time as a reminder that even forgotten lives possess unimaginable strength. His legacy is not written in medals or monuments, but in the resilience that echoes through stories like his. Let this account serve as a bridge to other wartime mysteries, to the countless forgotten heroes, resistance fighters, and anonymous survivors who shaped the hidden layers of World War II. Their stories intertwine, forming a web of human endurance you can continue exploring in our other episodes. Each reveals another fragment of history that refuses to be silenced. Will you follow these shadows deeper into the past? As long as we tell his story, the man who survived the impossible will never vanish again. His memory lives on in every viewer who pauses to reflect, in every question raised about justice, fate, and survival. He stands as proof that even in a world designed to end him, he endured a life no bullet could extinguish. Some stories fade, but this one refuses to die. The survival of this man challenges us to look deeper into the forgotten corners of World War II, the places where records end, but human resilience continues. If this story moved you, imagine how many others wait buried in classified files and lost archives. Our channel exists to uncover these truths, to bring light to histories overshadowed by time and conflict. Will you walk with us through the forgotten corridors of wartime secrets? Your voice matters. Share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this story affected you the most? Do you believe fate intervenes in moments like these, or are such events mere accidents of war? These questions drive the conversations that keep history alive. As you reflect on this man's impossible survival, consider how his journey changes your perspective on resilience and destiny. Let this not be the end, but the beginning of your exploration into hidden history. We invite you to watch our other episodes. Stories of forgotten heroes, secret missions, and mysteries buried in the archives of war. Each one reveals another layer of truth, another moment the world tried to forget. Together, they form a mosaic of courage, tragedy, and survival that defines the human experience in conflict. If this story inspired you, if it made you question what you thought you knew about World War II, then join our community. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you never miss an episode from the shadows. Every subscription helps these lost stories reach others who seek understanding and connection through the past. Will you help us keep these memories alive? History endures not because it is written, but because it is shared. You have the power to ensure that forgotten voices are heard again. Carry this story with you, pass it on, and allow it to remind you that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can rise. History lives when we tell it. And today, you helped that happen. Suscríbete al canal para ver más videos a www.2.shadowfiles.